As me and my mother left the comfort of our carriage, approaching the garden party through the large marble archways that decorated the entrance, all the familiar faces were there. The Lowensteins, the Arzriks, even the Sessoil family from France was in attendance. Most were gathered into small groups, having conversations while drinking wine or champagne, most likely talking about all the usual things that we tended to discuss at these garden parties. Business, etiquette, social events, the prosperity of each family and the thriving nature of their business, how well they were doing. All things to display and make certain their standing in the community. Lady Sanderson, of course, the first person to greet us as we enter the arches. "Oh, Madame Worthington, it's so nice to see you again. It's been ages," she says to my mother as she greets her with a hug. "Oh, things have been going quite well. As always, when you're Worthington, things just go your way," my mother said with a hearty laugh. "And what of your husband?" Miss Sanderson replied. "No one has seen or heard from him in quite some time. Is he still away on business?" "Yes, as usual," my mother replied. "Maintaining the family empire is a large task and requires most of his time. I do wish he weren't quite so secretive about the nature of his business affairs, but that's just the way Mr. Worthington is. No deal is done until it's done, he always says. And secrecy is an important part of effective business sometimes. Though I do so wish he would write more." "Well," Mrs. Sanderson replied, "it is to be expected when you come from a prosperous family." "Oh, and who is this?" Miss Sanderson says, looking down at me. "The youngest member of the Worthington family. I see you're growing quite well, strapping young man." "Thank you for the compliment, Miss Sanderson," I said, slightly bowing my head in a show of respect. "Oh, aren't you just adorable?" she replied, giving me a pinch on the cheek. "I'm sure in no time at all you'll be running the family business, just like your father before you." She stood up and began to address my mother again. "So, how are his studies going?" "Oh, they're going swimmingly for the most part," my mother replied. "His skills in mathematics and culture are very refined, though he isn't taking to painting or archery as well as I had hoped," my mother replied, tightening her overgown as the weather was still chilly. "I do so wish that I had more time for me, though. This is nearly the 6th time I've had to wear this dress, and I've had no time to go in for a fitting to make a new one." "Well, being a proper mother does take up one's time," Mrs. Sanderson said. "Oh, and as for the night's events, we have quite a wide array of things planned that should be quite entertaining for everyone. We even have some fun for the children in store." "Oh, do tell," my mother said, trying to squeeze some information out of her. Miss Sanderson replied. "Remember, some things are best kept secret. But as for the things you will enjoy at the party, we have a selection of wines. One of my most favorite is a new shipment from France. It's quite divine. Oh, and we recently acquired a new cook from Italy, and his food and pastries are simply to die for. You really must try them. They're like nothing you've ever had. And as for you, my young boy, you'll find that their children's section is right over that direction," Mrs. Sanderson said, pointing to the west side of the garden. "There's plenty of food and other children for you to associate with while you wait for tonight's festivities." As I stepped away from my mother's side, slowly making my way towards the child section of the garden party, watching my mother fade into the distance, starting to have conversations with Miss Sanderson, most likely about the quality of her dress, I did my best to avoid the rest of the adults around the party as I tried my best to find my way to a plate and make myself something to eat, as I was feeling a bit peckish for the morning. You had to be careful, otherwise you might end up being knocked down by an inebriated adult. I think it's a bit much to be drinking that heavily this early in the morning, but it's what you come to expect at these parties. I made myself a small salad, covered it with the Italian dressing, most likely made right here at the Sanderson estate by their brand new Italian chef. I gathered myself a small assortment of meat cuts, steak, ham, all cooked freshly and seasoned at location, of course. A selection of fine cheeses to choose from as well. There was also a very fresh stew available, but I dared not get it, especially with so many inebriated adults trampling about in all directions. That would simply be asking for trouble. After gathering myself a decent-sized plate, I began making my way to the west side of the garden, where most of the people my age and younger, and some even a little older, would be residing until such time as the festivities, as she described them, would begin for the evening. As I made my way outside of the adult section of the party, finally making my way through the maze of patent tablecloths, all with gold inlay designs and filigree, I approached what I immediately recognized as the children's section. Even though it was meant for children, it was still held to a high standard. The tables smaller, yet still adorned with the same patterned tablecloths that made the rest of the party look so elegant. And of course all the children were, like me, expected to behave in a civilized and adult manner. There were other children, of course, there, all of which were from high-class, prestigious families such as my own. Most of them I recognized fairly easily from the many other garden parties and galas, balls that my mother and father had attended before. I spotted the eldest son of the Sanderson family. Of course, him sitting around with his closest friends. They appeared to be laughing and having a nice conversation. I, of course, knew better than to get anywhere near that. So I did my best to stay out of their sight line, moving to the right side of the party, attempting to not be seen as much as possible by the Sanderson son. And finally, I found myself a quiet little corner with a table that had yet to be taken up by other children, and had a seat and began to eat my food, trying to do it as quietly and peaceably as possible. I sat quietly eating my food for 15, maybe 20 minutes before I was joined shortly by a few other children from neighboring families. There was Evans, a boy from a whaling family. His family owned multiple ships across the seaboard and frequented in high amounts of whale oil. His family was, of course, just as mine, well-to-do. His tuxedo cleanly pressed, though not as high quality as mine. His demure stature was not what you'd commonly expect from someone who hailed from a whaling family of men who conquered the seas, like I had read about in my adventuring books. His pale skin or fair complexion, a telltale sign that he didn't spend much time outdoors, preferring to stay indoors with books and knowledge. His short brown hair cut neatly in a bowl design, and handkerchief folded to perfection, neatly tucked inside of his breast pocket. Surprisingly enough, his diet did reflect that of someone who was used to being around the sea. He would regularly stock his plate with lobster or shrimp, fish, with sides of fresh vegetables, honeyed carrots, with fresh cinnamon. Then there was
Eliza Evergarden,
who also joined us at the table. A short, slight-statured girl with glasses, brown hair, usually tied into pigtails. Her dress a vibrant green with floral patterns. She herself hailed from a family of manufacturers. Specifically, her family manufactured arms for the military. As such, her education and knowledge reflected that. She was very well schooled in engineering, chemistry, She would often regale me with facts and figures about engineering, statistics, design. It was fair conversation, to be honest. I rather found engineering interesting, but she could droll on if you didn't stop her. She had a habit of talking more than she